All right, welcome everyone. Today I'm just going to take a little bit of time and practice some hand drawings. I'm going to really focus on illustrating how easy drawing hands can actually be if you just reduce it to its most simple elements. This is part of a drawing series that I'm going to entitle Drawing is Easy, and here's why. I think the most complex subjects can be rendered easy if we just draw them focusing on two primary strategies. The first strategy being finding the most essential angles. And the second strategy, taking a complex form and reducing it to the most simple iteration of its shape. So for example, the palm of this hand. I am going to reduce this to just a cuboid-like shape. It's going to be very flat, a little bit longer than it is wide. And in doing so, by finding all of these angles, angle number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then I'm going to take this shape and allow myself to reduce it to just a simple cuboid. And a cuboid just means any kind of three-dimensional rectangle. So I think a cube technically refers to a three-dimensional square. So cuboid is just a little more precise. And we're going to take these shapes and we're going to slowly allow ourselves to complicate them or to nuance them. But first I want to know, what's the length of the index finger in comparison to the length of the palm? And I'm getting something like this. If you're curious about this measuring technique, look for my YouTube video called Finding Distance. I'm going to take all of the fingers, and one way that I'm going to maintain my strategy of simplifying everything and looking for angles is I'm going to combine all the fingers into a single web. Just like this, one single shape. It's called enveloping. So I'll leave it like this for the time being, and I'm going to build this simple wedge shape of the thumb. And before I go into the thumb, I just want to get this part of the hand built off, just like that. See how everything is staying as simple as possible for as long as possible. Then I want to find the angle relationship between the thumb and the index finger. It's going to be something like this. You can continue the enveloping this way if you like. I think that's the correct angle relationship. I'm going to recheck it. It doesn't feel quite right. I think this needs to come in a little bit. I let myself leave the old line while I search for the new line, because the old line is going to give me information on where that new line is going to be. Okay, and we're starting to see the basic shape come out. And before I go too much farther on this, I really want to make sure I get that wrist placed in there. So, there's a lot of complex anatomy within the wrist, isn't there? Within the lower arm. But, I really am going to let myself simplify this lower arm into its most basic shape iteration, and I'm going to treat it like a cylinder. So, just like I'm drawing something cylindrical from the top, like a roll of paper towels. A roll of paper towels from the top is very easy to draw, right? Well, if we allow ourselves to take this complex anatomy and reduce it to its simplest form, it's just a cylinder. How far out is it going to go to the right? Well, I'm going to compare it to the length of the hand, about like this, out to here. So it's just a simple cylinder that tapers and gets thinner as it moves up toward the top. That's all we're doing here. And then we've got a second cylinder that moves in this direction. Really gonna let myself just keep these as basic cylinders. I won't talk about complex joints like the elbow. We just don't need to get into all that. If you can manage these cylinders, then the complex joints like an elbow or a knee, they'll come together very easily later on. But this is what we're concerning ourselves with. We're taking this complex form right here and all its smaller forms on it, and we're reducing it as best we can to the simplest iterations possible. Okay, how about this index finger? Well, what's the simplest form we can reduce this to? Yeah, exactly right. Just a series of cylinders. So you can start with one cylinder, or if you want, you can break the finger up into a series of cylinders to describe all the different digits. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to get this one major digit down here, and I'll allow myself to sort of combine the latter two digits because it's straight. Just anything I can do to tell the story more simply. I think maybe this needs to come a little bit farther in here. So I'm constantly stepping back and asking myself, what does this need? And what we can do for the rest here, and I think I made this finger too fat. So one thing you can do, how to space the fingers. Well, one thing I like to do, and I clearly need to do it right now, is we will replace this enveloping that I erased earlier. And I just want to measure the distance from the pinky finger to the middle of the palm and back up here. So from here to here and here to here, it's about halfway. And this is going to show me where the middle finger and the ring finger part ways. And so look at that, that's very good information. I did have the fingers placed incorrectly. So, and it all started with me stepping back and realizing that I think I made this index finger too big. So now that we have this spacing, we can take the gap or the spacing between here and here, and we can find where this index finger and middle finger are going to separate. So here we go. And our finger gets thinner and placed more correctly. Another thing that you can do is just find these ellipses and plan the ellipses for all four fingers. Something like that. Remembering to use our measuring techniques to find the distances between all the different fingers. Getting a little bit of foreshortening here and there can change that dramatically. And so here, these fingers, just like this right here, these cylinders, these fingers just become cylinders. A foreshortened finger is no big deal if you're just reducing it to foreshortened cylinders. Just like this, and let's build the next one off of it. Just like that, it's just a tapered cylinder, right? And then we can complete this middle finger here. Keeping it nice and light, I can step back and ask myself, is this feeling correct to me? If it is, then I can begin moving and continuing to find more specific shapes within the major shapes that I've already found. Just like that. So, and now I can start to clean this up a little bit. Remove some of this enveloping. Remove some of these artificial geometric lines and allow myself to replace them with more anatomically specific lines like these folds here in the palm. Allowing this thumb to just simplify into just this elongated sphere, this stretched cylinder. That's all we're doing. So, by starting with angles and using a strategy called enveloping, reducing the complex anatomy of the fingers, for example, into simple cylinders, suddenly the anatomy of one of the notoriously most difficult parts of the body to draw can become very simple. So, there we go. A very manageable hand. Why don't we move on to another reference? We'll use the same strategy. Okay, reference number 2. All right, so here's a really complicated one. Let's go to a more simple one actually, and then we'll get to the more complicated ones later. Okay, so here we go. We have got a fist. Now this fist is going to be much more simple than this, but it's a great one to kind of illustrate how best to simplify. So, what shape comes to mind when you look at the fist? The basic shapes that we're using: augmented spheres, augmented cuboids, and augmented cylinders. I think this fist is best reduced to just an augmented cuboid. Now I'm gonna make sure to hold up my drawing pencil, whatever it is, charcoal, graphite, and make sure I'm finding these angles. Remember, the name of the game is simplification, but you must do it in finding the correct angles. If you miss the correct angles, doesn't matter how well you draw the details or the anatomy or whatever, it's not gonna look good. The more experience I get with drawing, the more I realize angles are everything. Yeah, so I just did a quick measurement. In reducing this fist to a simple cuboid, I just wanted to measure and see how many times does this distance go into this distance? About 1 to 3. Then we're gonna have this thumb push out. And look at how, by reducing the complex anatomy of the fist into just a cuboid, and then finding this additional shape emerging from behind it, this volumetric fist is starting to emerge. Okay, how about the wrist? What are we gonna reduce the wrist to? This one's very easy. Just a cylinder. And it's a tapered cylinder, right? So it's going to be thinner. It conforms closer to the bone structure as we get closer to the hand. And it'll get wider as we move into the belly of the muscles in the wrist. But we don't need to concern ourselves with all that complex anatomy. The only thing we need to remember is that it's just a cylinder that tapers as it moves. It gets thinner as it gets closer to the wrist. And look at how simple. We've taken the complex anatomy of the hand and the wrist, and we've rendered it a cuboid, a cylinder, and this little shape emerging from behind it. Taking this and nuancing it, adding anatomy, or observing, breaking down these simple shapes into a combination of simple shapes in order to discover anatomy. Well, that's just so easy. We've already done the hard part. This is just a cylinder. Okay, here's another one. We can take these knuckles too and treat them just like augmented spheres. Okay, maybe they're spheres with a little bit more rigid point where the knuckles push out against the skin. And I think I've measured this incorrectly. I want to make sure I've got the space between these fingers placed correctly. Yeah, I think it's close, but I want to push this out a little bit farther. It's unfortunate that I bared down so heavily, because now it's more permanent, but it's okay. This is just practice. It's not like it's turning into a masterpiece or anything. And here we have a simple shape turning into a very complex shape. It's working out nicely. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay, let's get a fresh sheet of paper for this one. How on earth are we going to handle this complex pose? Well, okay, we've got our 3 shapes that we're going to use. Our sphere, our cuboid, and our cylinder. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is reduce, these are called metacarpals, these bones right here. So I like to call this part of the hand, the back of the palm, I like to call this the metacarpal block. And I treat it just like that. It is just a block. So I'm going to find the correct angles. And just build this 3-dimensional block. Something like this. Are you starting to see how these angles are coming together? And then I'm going to measure the width in relationship to the height. And it looks like it's about 1 to 1. I got that angle incorrectly. So this, from here to here, is going to bring us down to the base of this middle knuckle, and then we'll get this natural curving here. Okay, so I've just constructed basically the silhouette of this hand. I'm just taking a cube, I'm squashing it. So now this cube looks more like this. And then you allow yourself to give it a little bit of shape variety. So maybe the cube is starting to bend a little bit, right? Just like that. And if you can learn to take a cube, augment it like this, and augment it like that, you'll be able to draw anything. So let's get this a little more 3-dimensional here. Just thinking about this plane here where the fingers are going to build off, right? The fingers will build off like there's maybe the starting ellipse for the index finger. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself here. Next, I want to build just this basic wedge shape coming off where this thumb is going to build out. Thinking about the angle of the thumb. And how far out is the thumb going to go? I'll measure. I think the thumb's going to be about this long here. And then the thumb, I'm just taking a sphere and we're just squashing it a little bit, giving it a little more length. Flatter on top. Something like that. Okay. Now, I want to place these 2 middle fingers. Basic pinky shape. And now these middle fingers are going to build up like this. I'm just going to treat it like I'm finding the edge of the cuboid. And of course we've got this knuckle distinction here. but we don't need to find that yet. We're just thinking about this as discovering the plane of a cuboid is sitting on top of this cuboid. Very simple stuff. Just shape combination. So, just imagine like you can't see this cuboid. It's just going to be something like this. Can you see this shape in isolation? It's just a simple cube. And then we're just taking it and we're putting it on top of this cube here. And we start to see this construction of fingers on top of a palm. But it's because we're ignoring the complex anatomy and we're just building shape combinations. That's it. A little bit of enveloping just to find out where this index finger comes to. So let's lighten all this up a little bit and just treat it like it is a simple cylinder, like a roll of paper towels or something like that. Look how it curves out and then back in. Let's step back. How's that feeling? Well, we can kind of remove these sort of guiding ellipses and just observe the side we would actually see. And is it starting to read like a finger? Maybe so. We've got these wrinkles right here, or these folds of skin, I guess would be more precise. Okay, before we go too much farther, let's build the wrist. So the wrist is going to be something like this, right? Okay, we're just going to treat it once again like a cylinder that's tapering out as we move toward the elbow. It's like a cylinder that gets fat in the middle and then begins to get skinnier again. Step back, how's it looking? Reads correct to me so far. So we can keep going, and here's another cylinder. Just like that. And this hand is starting to come together rather nicely, I think. We can remove these lines illustrating that the lower arm is just a tapered cylinder. And now we can start to explore the specifics of these shapes. Like notice how this cylinder of the thumb kind of pulls down in front of this protruding bone right here. The belly of this pad comes back up here into some folds. Just like that. And then we've got these folds of skin here. Okay, now we can go ahead and separate these. So let's just remember how simple these shapes are. One good rule of thumb is find the simplest way to depict something and depict it that way. And then if you want to add more detail, think of the simplest addition or the simplest nuancing. It's easy to go from simple to complex. It is almost impossible to go from complex back to simple. And I think I need to bring this pinky out maybe a little bit farther. I don't actually know what the correct anatomical term for the pinky finger is. I'm sure there's some specific term for it. And here we are. I think we've reduced the complexity of the anatomy of the hand in this pose fairly nicely. I kind of like the way it's looking. Okay. I think that will do it. This has been a lot of fun. I hope you all have learned something today. If you have, like the video, let me know in the comments what you think, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you all on the next one. So, happy drawing. Peace.